Alright, timestamps below. I'm probably gonna spend about a third of the video just talking about reception, production circumstances, staff, and stuff like that, so if you do find that stuff boring, feel free to just skip it. I'll be spending the rest of the video talking about things like the story, the characters, the magic system, and the themes, of course, but anyway, so the season's swiftly coming to an end, and I have thus far watched 11 episodes of the newest traditional fantasy anime on the block, Hat Atelier. And as we head into the final arc of its opening season and the upcoming witch test, I think that I can say with very few reservations that I'm absolutely loving the show so far. Not just for its mostly brilliant, Ghibli-esque presentation, but also for its story, characters, and world building. Obviously, I'm not the only person who feels this way. It's wildly popular based on pretty much every significant metric I've seen, topping the popularity charts with both member numbers and praiseworthy scores on both Mal and AniList, and as far as I can tell, boasting the highest number of reviews for any new seasonal show airing on Crunchyroll. And it's no great mystery why it's performing so well. I think there are a handful of very obvious reasons why this one was always going to be a wildly popular anime series. For one, it has a dedicated and long-established audience, being based on an equally popular manga which has been running since 2016, beginning around a decade ago. This also means that it has legs to stand on, so to speak. A good track record, and as close as one gets in the anime industry to a guarantee that the show isn't just going to fizzle out and disappear when the first season is over. The other reason, which is perhaps more prescient in this era of anime, is that it serves well to fill a niche that people are deeply craving more and more of right now. Traditional character-driven fantasy shows with elements like fleshed-out magic systems, factions, and lore, as well as somewhat of a unique, retro-esque painterly aesthetic, paired with wonderful production values, which all gives it a cozy, somewhat nostalgic look and vibe. Think Freerun, Dungeon Meshi, Wistoria, Mushoku Tensei, Made in Abyss, as well as, of course, every other whimsical fantasy show hoping to emulate the natural, painterly aesthetic of classic Ghibli movies in recent years. It feels incredibly obvious to me that, for many people, it's the new one of those, and given how incredibly popular each new entry in this seeming fantasy renaissance has been thus far, I believe that that was always going to essentially guarantee it a certain level of success. I do think another component of this, which has arguably been downplayed by some, is that the show, thus far at least, has a bit of an E for everyone kind of vibe, as well as, controversial as it may be for some, an author, Kamame Shirahama, who has gone on record stating that she began writing the story with a broader, more universal, global audience in mind from the very outset. As she stated in a recent interview, "Since I work on American comics projects, I had overseas readers and manga fans in mind from the very beginning as part of the audience. That may have helped shape the way that I thought about the work and its potential reach." And while that's something that I'll admit I'm usually somewhat allergic to myself as a certified anime chud, thus far I think she does a pretty damn great job of making it all come off quite naturally. And I think that that just comes down to her sincerely believing in what she's writing. But setting all of that aside, as I think I've discussed it in more than enough detail in my previous video, the show does once again have a very accessible, E for everyone, the whole family could sit down and watch this without issue kind of vibe, which I think also gives it the same kind of edge that shows like Spy Family have. As long as you ignore all of the assassination stuff. Another pretty obvious reason why it's so wildly popular is its stellar production value, featuring tons of dynamic camera sweeps and shifting painterly backgrounds. And the reason for this is also no great mystery, because they got the A-team working on this one, as well as, seemingly, a much healthier production cycle than the vast majority of shows coming out of this industry. The anime has been in production by Bug Film Studio, the same upstart who produced Zom 100 in 2023 for around 3.5 years. And the only other project currently credited to said studio is an upcoming movie project that isn't coming out until next year. Title to be announced, date to be announced. Which is all to say, it's been in production for 3.5 years by a likely, small, but focused team, which has already proven it can produce great work with Zom 100's best episodes, and said studio has not been distracted by a multitude of different projects the way that so many studios seem to be these days, season after season after season. Also, it is worth briefly mentioning that its second top producer, and therefore most likely second to the top contributor and earner, Kodansha, is also the publisher of the source material, so they have every reason to want this to be a top-shelf production, a successful, well-marketed adaptation, and not just another project that they fund and shove out the door haphazardly. They have every reason to want it to be a major success, because if it does become a meteoric success the likes of JJK or Demon Slayer, they're gonna be raking in money coming and going by way of both the anime and its source material, the manga. So anyway, I'm not going to go into a bunch of details about individual animators and individual staff. It's not really my expertise anyway, and I don't think that it's really necessary to make my point, but let's look at a couple of key figures working on the show. The director is one Ayumu Watanabe, who was chief director for Komi-san Can't Communicate, and also directed Summertime Render, After the Rain, Mysterious Girlfriend X, Children of the Sea, Space Brothers, and is actually also directing the currently airing Akane Banashi, which leads me to believe that his job is likely done, or at least mostly done, concerning Hat Atelier already. Because both of these are absolutely gorgeous productions, and I can just hardly imagine someone directing them both simultaneously, but that's obviously speculation. Maybe he's just an absolute content directing machine. Anyway, his assistant director is Shun Shinohara. Shinohara doesn't have any previous credits to the role of director or assistant director, but he does have some history working with both Bug Films and primary director Ayumu Watanabe, having worked on episode direction and storyboard roles across Zom 100, Summertime Render, and Komi-san Season 2, as well as, separate from Ayumu and Bug Films, notably working on both Heavenly Delusion and 86 Part 2. One incredibly interesting and very notable role here is that of the composer, Yuka Kitamura. Witch Hat is actually her debut project as an anime composer, with the majority of her previous experience actually coming from FromSoft video games. Everything from Dark Souls 2 all the way up to Elden Ring. So while she may not be experienced with anime soundtracks in particular, she has plenty of experience writing fantasy music for the medium of video games, which I think translates over to this medium just fine. Absolutely stellar soundtrack so far, and it'll be dropping June 17th, if you're interested in picking it up, by the way. But okay, so it looks and sounds great, it benefits heavily from unique production circumstances, and it's obviously really popular, but what's it even about? Well, at risk of sounding lazy, I'm just gonna start by quoting the description that the author herself gave in one of her recent interviews with UNESCO. Yeah, just try to ignore that last part. When asked how she would describe the series to someone who is being introduced to it for the first time, she stated in the interview, "It is a story, the first volume of which was released in 2016 in Japan, set in a world where people believe that only those born with magical power can use magic. The protagonist is an ordinary girl who does not possess magic, but who longs to become a magic user. Through a certain incident, she encounters a magic user, enters the world of magic, and gradually begins to uncover its secrets. This is a story about possibility. Even a child without special inborn abilities can become a magic user. That framework is central to the story, but so is the emotional idea behind it. The possibility that someone who seems ordinary, or who feels excluded from a world of talent, may still find a way into it. That is one of the reasons I hope that the story can speak to readers who feel uncertain about themselves." End quote. The core characters consist primarily of a teacher named Kifri, or as I like to call him, Shoujo Gojo. Or if you want to use his full name, Mahu Shoujo Gojo, as well as his 4 apprentices. Centrally, Coco, the main character. Coco has, as previously mentioned, always had a passion for magic ever since she was young, but seemingly, tragically, no affinity whatsoever for it. However, she received a mysterious picture book and pen from a mysterious masked witch when she was young, but had no idea what to do with it, beyond simply appreciating the drawings within and playing with the pen, which she mistakenly thought was a wand. Until one day, when she secretly witnessed a traveling witch, Kifri, drawing magic seals, and decided to emulate his actions as a witch and replicate the drawings in the mysterious book. Unfortunately, as whimsical and inspiring as her new discovery of this secret of magic may have been at first, creating and witnessing innocent, beautiful, sparkling spells, the final spell that she was able to replicate set off a dangerous crystalline trap that consumed both her house and mother whole, trapping her mother in a frozen crystal state, kind of like that chick from Attack on Titan. Normally, her memories would be erased without prejudice, but she has key knowledge on the highly secretive masked witches, known as the Brimmed Caps, and Kefri is not going to allow a rare lead on said organization to go to waste, even if he has to bend a few rules and keep his lead a secret from the established powers. Thus, Coco enters the world of magic she always sought after with an incredibly powerful goal: to gain the skills and knowledge required to save her mother, even if it means casting herself into danger at the foot of forbidden magic and the Brimmed Cap witches. Kefri, on the other hand, is clearly an incredibly skilled witch, and seemingly an incredibly kind teacher, but mysteriously isolates himself almost entirely from the organization at the head of all the world's officially sanctioned good guy witches, the Pointed Cap witches, visiting them only when he must in order to stock up on supplies. He also seems to have a history with the Brimmed Cap witches, if I had to guess, a pretty intense history with, and perhaps a personal vendetta against them. This becomes clearer and clearer over time, not only because he's willing to break the rules and hide Coco's secrets, but also because he's shown to have some pretty clear moral grays, arguably crossing the line when he decides that his only choice to continue his pursuit of the Brimmed Caps in secret is to unknowingly erase the memories of one of his accomplices, which is super intriguing, not only making him a character with interesting moral grays, but also throwing into question whether or not he's really even fit to be a proper teacher, or whether he might be a genuine danger himself, whether he might have more skeletons in his closet that we don't yet know about. But obviously, that's pure speculation, at least at this time. As for the rest of his 4 apprentices, there's also Agate, who seems most properly set up to play the role of Coco's rival, assuming that this story features such a dynamic at all, long term. She seems to be a spurned member of a royal witch family or something like that, dead set on proving herself in order to prove her family wrong and rise through the ranks of the witch families. There's also Techia, seemingly Coco's closest and most open friend so far, and Rike, who plays the role of blue-haired Kudere with a mysterious, tragic backstory, as is tradition. Honestly though, the easiest way to remember all 4 is probably to just remember Green Girl, Purple Girl, Pink Girl, and Blue Girl, because I cannot for the life of me remember their actual names most of the time, but obviously that's a skill issue on my part. I'll remember them eventually. Probably. Obviously, there are plenty of other supporting characters slowly working their way into the story, many of which I do really like, for example, Kefri's teaching partner, as well as his friend on the inside within the Pointed Hat Witches, but it's difficult to say thus far what most of their core roles will be, or which ones will be most important in the long run. So let's just quickly go over the main factions themselves. The central protagonistic force in Witch Hat Atelier is known as the Pointed Hat Witches, a group of witches who help those in need, swear to safeguard the secrets of magic, and vow to never engage in what is known as forbidden magic. Their principal stronghold is a castle-like structure located within a magical bubble at the bottom of the sea known as the Great Hall. While this appears to be where most powerful witches, including once again one of Kefri's closest friends on the inside, reside, maintain supplies, and find safe harbor and organization as a unit, Kefri mysteriously refuses to make it his home and spends a lot of time, obviously, working under their radar in investigation and pursuit of the series' primary antagonistic force. Once again, basically only visiting them when he absolutely has to get supplies. The Brimmed Cap Witches, on the other hand, are the series' primary antagonistic force, a secretive masked organization who works from the shadows to slowly and subtly spread the knowledge of forbidden magic. Any magic that is deemed particularly destructive, directly affects human bodies, or meaningfully alters the natural makeup of the world's habitat itself. They have somewhat of an obvious advantage in that they have access to stunningly powerful magics that the pointed caps refuse to engage in, but perhaps their weakness is in their lack of numbers or organization and the fact that they are forced to work from the shadows. It remains to be seen exactly what the dynamic here will amount to, but I'm intrigued to see where it goes, as we'll talk about a bit more later. And then there are the Knights Moralis, a specialized faction within the Pointed Cap Witches who all appear to be highly skilled, specialized, and have an absolute zero tolerance for any sign of forbidden magic of any kind, no matter the reason for it and no matter who it comes from, showcasing early on in the story that they are perfectly willing to erase the memories of even an innocent child on the spot, strictly to ensure zero chance of forbidden magic spreading, or even the knowledge of magic in general spreading to the general populace. Basically, they represent absolute lawful justice to a brutal, unwavering, hyper-focused degree. And with all of that, I'm sure that anyone can imagine how this story has garnered a reputation for having an interesting lore and world building, generally speaking. But perhaps the most interesting element of all of this thus far would have to be the magic system itself, which I think has proven to be quite extensive and well thought out so far. Okay, so let's put on our thinking caps and pray that I explain this correctly. So, all magic spells in Witch Hat Atelier are produced by drawing a magical glyph-like illustration called a seal, using what is known as conjuring ink. This is special ink, not just regular ink. Each spell or seal contains 3 components: sigils, signs, and rings. The sigil is drawn in the center of a magical seal and determines the sort of core elemental effect or affinity of the spell: fire, water, earth, wind, light, etc. While sigils determine the element of the spell conjured by the seal, the signs surrounding it influence the effect of that element. Its shape, direction, speed, reach, and or balance, for example. Depending on the size of the overall seal, the signs used, and even the environment in which the seal is created and activated, the very same inner water sigil could create anything from a small, stable orb of water used for gentle, delicate tasks like washing something or cooling someone down, to a massive, raging torrent of water capable of flooding a small city. The third and final element of any magical spell, or seal, is the outer ring. The ring has essentially no effect on the type of spell created, but is instead used to activate the spell, and is thus always completed last. The seal's outer ring will not activate unless 100% complete, which allows witches to prep spells in advance, allowing them to activate pre-prepared spells by simply completing the ring with a final, single drop of conjuring ink. Naturally, witches use this to their advantage by preparing compact books of spells prepped in advance. Although this does have its limitations, spells prepared in advance cannot be altered in order to adapt to unique situations. I'm sure there's a lot more that I could go into here, such as ways of linking or combining multiple spells and the like, but I think the last basic element that's worth pointing out is that the stability of the drone seal itself, aka the quality of a seal's line work, also determines the stability of the spell generated itself. A shaky seal with lopsided signs will be unstable, unpredictable, and shoot off with a lopsided sense of direction, fittingly just like the drawing that created it. And then there is, of course, the aforementioned forbidden magic, which is a general description of any spell considered excessively dangerous or destructive. But the particular factors taken into account when defining them are also pretty interesting. Any spell that affects the human body or is drawn directly onto the human body, including healing magic, is considered a forbidden spell. Same for any spell that transforms large structures of the overall environment itself, what you could basically think of as sort of terraforming spells. Anyway, there are other prerequisite conditions for defining other types of forbidden magic, but beyond that point, I would basically just be reading stuff from the wiki page that I don't really even understand yet, so we'll just leave it there. And beyond that, I'll just quickly mention that there's a ton of interesting stuff that's mostly just been hinted at so far that I feel is incredibly intriguing for the future. Obviously, I'm looking forward to seeing more from the dynamics of the different factions, and especially to find out exactly why Kefri seems intent on working outside of the system in his pursuit of the brimmed caps, occasionally engaging in activity that makes me genuinely question if he might even be too dangerous to be apprenticing children to begin with. But also just the kind of freaking locations we've been teased at so far. All of the strangely terraformed locales previously affected by forbidden magic, the utterly fantastical testing grounds for future witch tests to come, wherever the hell the brimmed caps are operating out of, and speaking of the brimmed caps, just wondering what else they have in store for us in the future after seeing, for example, that one dude who was willing to essentially erase his own body to become invisible, as well as the other dude or chick who was able to teleport through the conjuring ink bottle through some kind of weird psychedelic water spell when Kefri was trying to figure out what the seal inside of it was. That all makes me really fascinated to see what all of the different brimmed cap members are like, which is all to say, generally speaking, I just really dig the lore and the world building, and I can't wait to see more of this fantastical world unfold as the series continues. But what about the themes? Well, thus far, I would argue that the core theme I've picked up on most repeatedly is as follows. Talent is bullshit. Real skills are learned through the accumulation of useful knowledge and the development of skills through hard work, time, and repetition, aka mileage in one's discipline. You might say, that's why we call them disciplines. This is a theme that I loved in Dress Up Darling episode 4, as I discussed in a video not so long ago, and I love it here as a general overarching theme as well. First of all, this element is kind of embedded into the very premise of the story. The world's lie is, after all, that only some people are born with magic ability, aka the inborn talent to use magic. But the truth is that literally anyone with a pen and paper, as well as the knowledge, skills, and discipline, can use it. Agate also says as much within the first few episodes. Ironically, she kind of scoffs and says it as a means of trying to demean Coco's efforts. Anyone can learn with enough repetition, she says, as if to imply that Coco's progress isn't uniquely impressive. Anyone could do that. But even this jab that she gives Coco for her efforts only further cements this truth. Anyone can learn this skill and become great at it, regardless of things like inborn talent. There's also the fact that early on in season 1, it's kind of her primary inner struggle. Coco keeps thinking that because she is so far behind the other witches, they must be special. They must have inbuilt talent that she doesn't have. But the truth is, insofar as they are ahead of her, they're ahead of her because they've been training repeatedly for years before her and have put in the mileage and the repetition required to learn their skills. And ironic to bring it up given the controversy around the interview, but I think this actually tracks really well with the tail end of the quote that I mentioned from the author earlier. And I quote, "Even a child without special inborn abilities can become a magic user." That framework is central to the story, but so is the emotional idea behind it. The possibility that someone who seems ordinary or who feels excluded from a world of talent may still find a way into it. And once again, that's a theme that I really appreciate personally. I think in the real world, people often place far too much weight on inborn talent and natural affinities that they perceive people having. People readily appreciate the talent in someone's ability to do something extraordinary or seemingly special because that's the part that they can see in the present with their own eyes. What they can't see are the hours spent daily, year after year after year, honing reliably repeatable skills. And that's my soapbox. The two potential downsides that I could see for certain people trying to watch this show seem pretty obvious, and they are: A, it features some of the cheesiest shit I've ever seen in my life. Like, even for a show about 4 young girls learning magic, it still does have some exceptionally cheesy moments. For example, the scene where they create a giant bed out of a combination spell that forms cloud magic to calm down a freaking dragon of all things. I mean, personally, I thought it was incredibly funny thanks to the way that it was animated, and the build up to it helped give it payoff when you seen the level of skill and teamwork that was required for the girls to pull it off with pretty much perfect unison. But still, it was incredibly cheesy, and I can see how that might turn some people away, or leave the vibe of the show just feeling a bit too unserious for some people, especially for those who are basically just seeking a flashy action shonen with good aura forming and all that good stuff. And B, it's a magic show, and while I do think that there's a solid, extensive, well thought out sense of logic to the magic system, as I discussed earlier, like many magic stories before it, it does still feel at times that the magic is basically just whatever the author can dream up in the moment with very few limitations, which is not really a problem for me. That's arguably literally the appeal of magic shows. And once again, it's not like there isn't an idea of structure and rules built into the show. The way that different elements and directions and sizes and shapes and even the environment that a spell is summoned in are all taken into account when determining what effect a magic seal produces, which I really appreciate. All of those elements certainly ground the system a bit. I also love all of the clever little touches, like witches carrying around pre-drawn spells to get around the limitations and time constraints that are present within said system. And you know, the fact that the show goes out of its way to point out that even those pre-prepared spells also have their own limitations, the lack of an ability to adapt them in the moment. All of that stuff is totally awesome, but when I realized that there are spells for things like repeating other spells, my worries began to intensify quite a bit, to be honest. And then there was episode 5, where Kefri summons a water dragon the size of a freaking city, which is still not technically forbidden magic so long as it doesn't affect humans, and was seemingly only possible thanks to his elevation and the abundance of rain clouds in the sky. He would also basically only be able to use this because they were in this sort of anomalous realm. But I do get the feeling that if we've seen stuff like that already as early as episode 5, things could become more structured over time, and that could have simply been a nice little preview of what high-level magic in a highly specific situation looks like. Or the magic could become completely unhinged if power creep takes over and they keep repeatedly trying to top that or expand the system, you know, too much at some point. Fortunately, I hear a lot of people say that the magic system only continues to be fleshed out more and more over time, and I've really loved the level of detail that's gone into establishing not only how it works, but practical ways that witches work around its established limitations. And I've seen lots of fascinating illustrations explaining elements of the magic system, and even people theory crafting and drawing their own custom spells in online communities around the show, which is all really awesome. So I'm hopeful that that won't be a big problem in the long term. But obviously, for us anime onlys, it remains to be seen how the system will shake out over time. But anyway, this has probably been a bit rambly and all over the place, and I obviously could have just waited until the season wrapped up, but I was afraid if I did, I probably would have ended up just not talking about the show at all and getting caught up in other projects. After all, not only is a huge new season right around the corner, including not only the continuation of series like Mushoku Tensei, but also the freaking Ghost in the Shell reboot by Science Saru, but also I already have a massive backlog of videos to finish editing. And more importantly, I really want to start dedicating more time once again to making looser, but also more fully fledged edited video essays specifically for things like classic shows, as well as just general topic type stuff, which I do think will probably be a little more valuable than just talking about whatever the current new thing is at any given time, as I've, kind of made a habit of doing over the years. So it is what it is. I'm really enjoying this series. I can't wait to see what the final arc and the second magic test have in store, what all of the different dynamics and mystery elements end up culminating in, and I hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have. Anyway, if you haven't seen it already and just so happen to be interested, I made a huge video discussing the controversy around Kodansha's ties to the UN, discussing all of the context around the companies, and reading and commenting on the entire UNESCO interview with the author of Hat Atelier, which I actually thought was a relatively interesting interview, at least on the part of the author herself. And obviously, I think you probably already know if you're the kind of person who's interested in that type of stuff or not. If you didn't even know that such a controversy existed, consider yourself blessed with a healthy algorithm. If you're not interested in that, maybe just check out one of these two Freerun videos instead. Or this Call of the Night video. Yeah, honestly, just do that instead. Anyway, peace as always.